You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm chatting to author, speaker, and co-founder of Gem Advertising. Growing up, this week's guest had quite the different start to life than what you would expect looking at his LinkedIn profile today. Putting on a pair of ice skates at the age of 3, he had his sights set on taking figure skating all the way to the Olympics. Learning the harsh realities of failure at a young age when this didn't happen gave him the drive he needed to pursue his other passion for business and entrepreneurship. Now co-founder of a multi-million-dollar advertising agency, TEDx speaker, and author of Honest to Greatness, an observation on how today's leaders use brutal honesty to achieve massive success, I think it's safe to say all that time learning to pivot on the ice translated pretty well into his real life as he transformed a hard situation into a fully fledged corporate success story. To tell us how he did it, here's what it's like to be Peter Kozodoy. Before we get stuck into the episode, I just wanted to say that if there is a drop in sound quality throughout, I'm very sorry. But in respect of social distancing during COVID-19, I've had to record episodes remotely. In this challenging time, we're all trying our best, so I really hope everyone is staying safe and that you enjoy the episode. Welcome, Peter. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I think a really good starting point to dive into the conversation is to just go all the way back to the very beginning and chat a little bit more about your experiences growing up.
Oh gosh, Lucy, how long do you have? Well, one of the things that ended up defining my childhood and now my life was I was actually a very competitive figure skater. Yeah, believe it or not, I started skating at 3 among a host of other things,
Wow.
skiing and a bunch of other things. But figure skating always stuck with me. It was one of it is, I would say, the most difficult thing I've ever tried, I've ever done. There's nothing like being out in front of 1,000 people and falling on your ass, wearing tights. After that, nothing is difficult, I assure you. And what's interesting now that I look back is I think in many ways that defined my entrepreneurial journey, because it's a solo, figure skating is a solo sport, right? So I learned to be on my own. I learned to be coachable and teachable. I learned the value of perseverance and failing multiple times, which, trust me, I've done over and over. So in a lot of ways, it taught me a lot of things that ended up parlaying into my career, which at the time I probably wouldn't have gotten even if you told me. But interesting how life pans out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Figure skating, wow. I mean, that's not, your average extracurricular activity. But that must have been a really cool experience. And also you touched there on how much it taught you about failure and getting back up again, and persevering. And so I'm wondering how that impacted your next choices in life, which I guess would have been deciding what you wanted to do after school and if you wanted to go and study and what you wanted to study. So can you take me through that a little bit and what those choices ended up being for you?
Yeah, I was always fascinated about business and about how businesses worked, because I always looked at the study of business as a study of how life works. I mean, everything we do as human beings, whether we're eating food or buying anything, relaxing on a couch, watching a television, all these things have to be dreamt up, manufactured, and sold. And so I always saw business as a parlay into understanding life, how our planet works. So early on in undergrad, I knew I wanted to major in economics, and I did actually double major in economics and Italian studies. And I actually finished all of my courses early. And so I started taking extra classes at the business school. I was at Brandeis at the time. And so through taking those classes, I of course became more fascinated, particularly with marketing and communications and how critical just the simplicity of being a better communicator, both as a leader and as an organization, translated into earning more profits. And so, what was interesting, Lucy, and I'm not afraid to admit, is I graduated college early, Phi Beta Kappa and summa cum laude. So I come out and I've got, all these business classes under my belt, and I'm like, well, this is going to be easy. I know exactly what to do, right? So start my first company at 22 with my business partner. And the next 4 years were a real education in business and entrepreneurship and how difficult it actually is. So, there was a tremendous number of failures and a lot of eating pasta on the floor of my condo and tuna out of the can and all those great things, until we finally got our act together and started pivoting our model into something that could be sustainable and could work, and eventually grew that to a multi-million-dollar marketing agency.
And that marketing agency is GEM. Am I correct in saying that?
Correct. Yep.
So to really pick it apart and go back more in detail to those years, at 22, when you just graduated, you'd obviously done incredibly well at school, and I guess went into the working world feeling quite confident. But what were those initial few months like, trying to get your own company off the ground, and how did you build it from scratch?
The problem then, and what I ended up writing a book about now, is we make underlying assumptions, dishonest assumptions about the way that business works, but the way that we work as humans, about what it takes to succeed, and so on and so forth. Okay. So we started GEM as a video production company, but the reason we started as a video production company is because both my business partner and I both come out of figure skating. We have that background. And in 2007, we had this awesome idea that why do we have Dancing with the Stars on TV? You know the show?
Yeah.
And yet figure skating is the most watched Olympic sport every year, bar none, much more popular than ballroom dancing. And so we said, why is there a show about ballroom dancing, but not about figure skating, right? So we went to pitch the show. And in order to pitch a show, we were like, well, here's a great idea. Let's do a pilot for the show. Now, by the way, that was not a great idea. That was a way to waste tens of thousands of dollars. However, we ended up putting together a television production crew to film the pilot. And while we had the crew together and now finding ourselves tens of thousands of dollars in debt, we were like, well, we probably need to go like sell something commercially, make some money, dollars, makes sense. And that's when we set out as a video production company. So that's sort of mistake number one, is we just took what was in front of us and we said, okay, let's go sell this, instead of backing way up and being more strategic about like, wait, what are all our skill sets? What does it even take to build a good business to begin with? Like, is that the right business for us? What are the potential pros and cons of that? Like, we didn't do any of that. We were just like, this makes sense. We have shit tons of debt and we're going to be in debt forever if we don't sell something. We've got this TV crew, so let's sell that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then over the course of the first few months and even a couple of years, we were selling like $800 local television commercials for car dealerships, which is exactly glamorous as it sounds, which is not glamorous at all. It was terrible. And I remember thinking, Lucy, like, if only we could sell more $800 television spots, like we'd be rich. Like, this is the way to be a millionaire. Well, apparently I had taken business courses, but not math courses, because if I'd stopped to do the math, I would have figured out that it would have been nearly impossible to film that many television commercials to make $1 million business. So sadly, I was very misinformed. And it took, slowly kind of communicating with customers, seeing what they wanted. And we started adding on services. So we took on like social media, and we were like, can you guys do social media? And we're like, yeah, we can do social media. And internally we're like, can we do social media? No, but we can find out how. So we'll hire. So we had to hire a social media expert, and boom, now we offered social media. And the big next turning point was when we were beginning to get hired by other agencies to fulfill their video production. And through working with them, we said to ourselves, like, these agencies are terrible. I mean, they don't take good care of their clients. Their strategies suck. They overcharge. They miss deadlines. I mean, we can do this, So we were filming television commercials for a local college and doing videos, like testimonial videos of their students. And that was for maybe a little over a year. And the VP of marketing calls us and she says, listen, we think we're going to actually hire an agency of record. It's like $1 million account. Would you like to come in and pitch it? And so we kind of put that on mute, and we were like, well, do we have the resources to do that? Like, do we have any idea how to be a full service agency? Do we know how to place media? Do we have we don't have a graphic designer? So we agreed, no, we have no idea how to do this. So we got back on the phone and we were like, yeah, absolutely, we can do it. We will be there at that pitch date and time. You just tell us when, we'll be there. And so we got to the pitch. And we worked really hard on it. We assembled the right team. We brought in outside vendors and whoever we needed to make sure they were in the room. And we put together this presentation. And in the presentation, we showed them a video of their own students and what their students said. Because that's what we had been doing, right? Our strength was we actually knew what their students thought of them. And then at the end, we revealed a tagline that we would base the entire campaign around. And the president of the college went silent. So the room went silent. And she's looking down at this presentation package we sent her. And she's looking, everyone's like palms sweating, right? I'm about to like run out of the room. And she looks up and she says, this is amazing. I've been waiting for years for this. How did you do this? And I was very tempted, Lucy, to say like, well, I'm clearly the smartest person you've ever met in your life. So that's how, but I didn't say that because it wasn't true. What was true was, and as we said to her, we didn't do this. Your students did. All we did was go to the front lines, the people who actually spend money to do business with you. And we asked them, what is so special about you? And they told us. And that's when and so we won the pitch, right? So it's our first big client, and we parlayed that into other clients. And so that was a real turning point. But it was also one of the first times I realized how little strategic and organizational honesty there is out there. We have executives sitting in boardrooms thinking to themselves that they know everything, and all they have to do is ask the people who matter. And it seems so simple, and yet I can tell you one thing. I have worked now with local car dealers up to Fortune 500s and even Warren Buffett himself, who, he's, by the way, fantastic. But many of them, businesses big and small, miss this critical point about being honest about what's going on in the world, being honest with your customers and what they want and how they're changing and all these sort of things. And that's how I ended up writing Honest to Greatness, my book.
I think the thing I'm wondering is, you mentioned a few times, that you came up against situations where an opportunity presented itself, but perhaps you knew in your head that, physically or on paper, you guys didn't have the supposed needed skills to complete it, but you still, you took yourself off and you learned how to do it and you showed up and you delivered. But internally, and I guess from an emotional perspective, how did you deal with that feeling of underpreparedness or uncertainty if you could actually do it? How did you push yourself forward to make sure that on the day you did deliver?
So it's a couple things. So the first is, the reason I'm an entrepreneur is because I'm a pain in the ass. Like, nobody wants to hire me. I'm going to question everything. I'm going to tell you I can do it better. Now, the great thing about starting your own business is you have to know that you can do it better. The shitty thing about starting your own business is if you think you can do it better, you actually have to go out and do it better, right? Mm. Now, that question of yours, Lucy, is super interesting because in my opinion, it comes down to all the way down, way down to core values. In my core values are things like honesty, things like integrity, things like absolute determination and perseverance, okay? There is no way ever I would take on a project if I wasn't sure I could do it, okay? Now, we'll get to the caveats of that in a moment because that's a really interesting discussion. But so when I look at companies today, and I've met now so many founders who see, folks flashing their Ferraris on Instagram and assume that's success. A lot of folks have adopted this fake it till you make it attitude. The problem is they are fakers in their bones, in their personalities, in their core values. They're the type of folks that are hungry for a sale, but once they get it, they do not have the core values and the drive and determination and intelligence and resourcefulness that it takes to actually fulfill it. We would have given our money back to the client before we allowed a failure. It's just who we are. So I would caution folks out there against this, what I think is an increasingly prevailing mindset of, I have to say or do whatever I can to get something. That is such short-term thinking if you are not absolutely sure that you can deliver. Now, back to sure about delivery, right? And this, ties into why I ended up writing a book about this too, is I was extremely surprised and I could not rectify in my own mind the following. Over the course of our career, Lucy, I would give clients growth strategies. Some of those clients took those strategies, listened to and allowed us to execute, and got ridiculous amounts of return on investment. I mean, made millions of dollars, 500% ROI off of what we did for them. Other clients who paid us just as much, who wanted the same level of results, we would deliver on what we said we would deliver, and they would just blow up on the launch pad. like between infighting and internal politics and the leader's bias and ego and this person's political, like they just could not get out of their own way. And it was remarkable to me. And I used to sit around and think like, what a bunch of morons. I mean, how did these people ever even get into the positions they got into? Now, that was my ignorance. Of course, they're not morons. You don't get to be an executive at any sort of company without being smart. And that's when I realized it's not just smart. It's also this thing, strategic honesty. It's the ability for executives to be honest about what's going on in the world that's changing, shifting trends, what's going on with the others around them, their other executives, the mindset of their frontline employees, shifting trends in their customers, and then finally honest with themselves that although they've gotten to the position they've gotten to, maybe they don't know everything. Maybe there are new things to learn. Unfortunately, in this life, failure teaches. That's why some of the greatest minds of all time have epic failures, because it teaches humility and it teaches honesty. Whereas folks I've found who have just consistently been promoted, whether that was warranted or whether they were the CEO's nephew or niece or whatever, success doesn't teach anything. In fact, I've found it entrenches people into their way of thinking. Think, well, obviously I've gotten this far, so I must be doing something right. And unfortunately, that is another form of short-term thinking. And what I've seen is that mindset in the minds of executives can actually stall and then sink an organization. And we've seen it with our own eyes over and over and over again. Even when people see the train coming at them, they just, as an organization, cannot move. And it really, to me, goes back to dishonesty on some level.
The other thing I guess I'm wondering is, so you have this massive company, it's doing so well, and it's really taking off, but you're also a business coach too. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. And I mean, I think when you say things like massive company taking off, I mean, I don't see it that way. I very much from a young age, from like not missing the Olympics and figure skating. I mean, I walk around with some massive chips on my shoulder, trust me, that fuel me higher. So, it's funny when I hear people say that, I'm like, to me, it's not. I mean, everyone looks up, right? I look up to like Mark Zuckerberg, who's only a couple years older than I am. And I'm like, wow, well, I haven't done shit with my life. That's not good. So,
well, I think you've done relative. More than the average person anyway.
Well, thank you.
But yeah, so you decided to branch out into the business coaching realm, and you also wrote a book as well. So I guess I'm wondering what provoked that move and what made you want to enter that space.
I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. One of the things that I had to learn, which was really shocking to me, that I would never have believed if you told me, is that entrepreneurship is 10% about business, 100% about people, and 1,000% about the self. It is an extremely personal journey, diving into who you really are, what you really want, what it's going to take to get there. Entrepreneurship happens between your ears. It is a mindset. And like I said, I mean, if you had told me that at 22, I would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, this is about spreadsheets and income statements and a sales funnel. And like, I just didn't get it. That the strength and weakness of an entrepreneur is the same, which is when we wake up in the morning, we get to do anything we want, right? We can take our businesses any direction. We can put together any task list we want. Now, everyone with a 9-to-5 job sees that as a blessing, but actually it's also a curse, because many entrepreneurs wake up in the morning and they think, what the hell do I do? I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, there were so many times it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So imposter syndrome runs rampant. And when I got to the other side of having built a multi-million-dollar business and learned so much about mindset and also all the tools and partnerships and how to foundationally structure a business in a better way, I said to myself, it's crazy for me to allow just one other entrepreneur to have to go through what I did, because everything for me really changed when I got mentors, when I got into entrepreneurs organization and began to meet other entrepreneurs who had built wildly more successful companies than mine, who could tell me like, oh yeah, like, why are you doing this, and that? Have you ever thought of that, and this? And I was like, no. And they're like, oh, well, if you do that, you'll be, instantly more successful. And here's why. And so I was able to have these incredible shifts happen rapidly once I got someone who had done it before to just point it out. So from then I said, you know what, I would love to get back into coaching. And I come from a long line of teachers, from my grandfather to my sisters. So it's just extremely fulfilling to me. I'm actually just yesterday, I got home from a conference of 45 entrepreneurs, helping them work through and bring them all the way back to the fundamentals and the basics. And I guess, as a former figure skater, or anyone who does sports, that makes sense, right? How many times do your coaches bring you back to the fundamentals? Because nothing about business is difficult, but you have to go through the entire curve. I call it simplicity on the far side of complexity. We start out that everything's simple, right? It's like, oh, I'm gonna be a video production company. I'm gonna sell video to car dealers, right? Simple. But then as things happen, it gets more complex. Well, maybe we can do this for other people. Maybe we should, should we hire? Should we outsource? It's like, oh crap. All right. Well, now, all of this is floating around one's head, and there's confusion and frustration and fear. And then now that I've come through the whole thing and all the pivots and on the other side, it's come back to like, oh, this is super simple.
Your teachings and your writings have taken you to the TEDx stage as well, which I think must have felt like such a great achievement. I don't know if you feel that way about it, but I'd be wondering if you could talk me through that experience and what that was like.
Yeah, so that came out of my second sort of reckoning after figuring out as a teenager I wasn't going to go to the Olympics. I took turning 30 very hard. Now, by that point in time, I had built a great business. I had just gotten married. My wife and I were flipping a new house. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I should have just shut the hell up and been happy, but it was not that simple. I really looked around and figured out that I had somewhere along the line taken my foot off the gas from the life that I saw myself living. And that's sort of back to personal honesty, right? And there were just certain big chunks that I knew I had in me to still achieve that, like I said, I was, for some reason had stopped or stalled. One of those things was being an author and a speaker. Like if you ask me like who I am in my bones, I am an author. I can't explain it to you. That's just who I am. Mm-hmm. So once I figured that out, again, it's like, oh, that seems simple. I'll just like write a book and start speaking. Not simple at all, as you can imagine. From having that thought to publishing my book, it was a 4-year, extremely difficult and arduous journey of having to figure out, from scratch, how do you even do that? And what all the components are. Well, it turns out that you need to be published on different platforms. So I had to figure out how to get picked up on Forbes and Inc. and Huffington Post and all that stuff. You have to get in front of groups. So I had to network and figure out, okay, how do I get to speak at a Rotary Club or Digital Book World or TEDx? And I promise we'll get to that in a moment. I had to build a social media following. I hated social media. I still hate social media. But when I went to a literary agent, he was like, where's your social media following? And I was like, I don't know. I don't have a social media following. And he was like, well, you do now. You better get to work, dum-dum. So then I had to start off in that direction. So again, learning. I mean, having a book is a business, right? I have to not only sell the book, but structure it in a way that the book can sell me. So the TED Talk was a piece of that platform. They call it an author platform that I knew would be important. Just saying you have a TED Talk, it opens doors. Let's be honest. So I started, examining the process. How do you even get a TED Talk? I started reaching out to different TEDx talks and applying, and really honing the idea and learning how do you pitch yourself as a speaker. And so finally I got a call and they were like, yeah, this resonates with the theme of our event. So we'd love to have you. Ironically, I've done a ton of speaking now, a ton. And most of my talks, I have a rough outline of where I want to go, but it's pretty interactive with the audience. I mean, I'm bouncing off of them all the time. And I don't, rehearse any of what I'm going to say because I know structurally the points I want to get across. And those talks go really well and they don't really make me nervous. I like being on stage. As I said, after falling on your ass in tights, nothing's difficult. But a TED Talk, you have to have memorized word for word. And so you can imagine 17 minutes of speaking, memorized word for word, that's a lot of words. That actually made me really, really nervous.
You mentioned earlier on in the interview as well that when you're first entering business and first, starting out in everything, that you didn't really know what it took to build a great business. So I would be interested to know now, 12 years on, having, created that quote unquote great business from an outside view. I know you said that you might not feel like that all the time, and having your coaching and everything, do you now know in a nutshell what it does take to build a great business?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, and I come across business models all the time and they make me shudder. I'm like, and I'll give you a perfect example. I mean, I was talking to a couple folks over this weekend, and this one awesome girl is a CPA, and she's young, maybe 30, and wants to build a CPA firm. And that's great. But like, if you asked me, like, Peter, would you want to have a CPA firm or a law firm or any other professional services type company like that? Well, a marketing agency is a professional services type company, right? And I'll tell you right now, there are inherent problems in that business model that you can never get away from. For instance, you're always billing time, so there's no scalability. You have to hire professional people who can leave you at any time after they've developed relationships with your customers. Professional people with educations are typically a pain in the ass to deal with. You're talking to one of them right now, Lucy. We think we know it all. So there are issues, right? Your profitability is capped for market rates and what competitors are willing to charge. There are just inherent issues in business models like that don't exist in other places. You have to generate demand is another one. Then I'm talking to a girl who owns a mobile pet grooming business. Well, this is a fantastic business, especially right now, because people can't leave their houses. They have pets. The pets need to be groomed. They need to be groomed often. They don't really care who comes and grooms their dog, right? It's like, oh, there's a new person. Are they good? Okay, cool, whatever. So there's a lot of interchangeability, and you don't have to generate demand. I mean, I can't tell you, I live here right outside New York City. I've called 2 mobile pet grooming salons here. They won't even return my calls. They're so busy. So like, that's a business that is much more interesting to me. There are inherent properties in it that make it more attractive. Software, tech, very attractive businesses. You've got one investment up front, and then you can scale the crap out of it. And the incremental profitability is just huge.
I know that no one can predict the future, and even in job interviews, I hate getting the 5-year question, but I am so interested to know what you do see the next few years looking like for you, both as an individual and then also in terms of your company as well.
I would love to build and this is, by the way, this is a brand new vision. You, outside of my wife, you are the very first person that's going to hear this. So you ready for it?
Exclusive. Yeah, I am.
I would love to build a private equity firm where I take partnership positions in companies that I think are promising. And instead of charging for coaching, right? So instead of giving me dollars for coaching, I'm basically going to partner with you in your business and try to get you to the multi-million-dollar level and then a successful exit. So over time, I would love a portfolio of businesses that I can just run around and act like a chairman. That would be like dream business to me. And I think I'm going to try to put together that first deal this year.
And then I have one more question for you, and I'm going to let you get on with your day. If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you now, having been through everything you've been through in your life in terms of your career and your personal life and all of it mashed together, what's the biggest piece of advice you would give that 10-year-old self moving forward in life?
Stop worrying.
I love
just
that.
Like, there's nothing to, as my business partner says, worry doesn't solve anything. It's completely useless, and there's no reason for it.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for coming on and chatting with me today and sharing your incredible story. It's been so motivating and inspiring, and I know that a lot of people will resonate with it or take a lot from it. So thanks for giving up your time. It's my pleasure, and please come join me for an honest conversation at honest2greatness.com. That's honest2greatness.com. You can take the 21 question honesty quiz, which will tell you how honest you really are and your honesty profile. And, of course, I'd be, very grateful if you considered picking up a copy of Honest to Greatness on Amazon or wherever books are sold by you. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share, and leave a comment if you like what you hear. And don't forget to follow @WhatIt'sLikePod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Peter's work and to buy his book, visit the links provided in the show notes and take a look at his TEDx Talk there too. I'll be back on Thursday with more inspiring stories, but for now, this has been What It's Like with Luce.